friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your YouTube watching eyes. Dev again for another week. This week has flown by. They've all been flying by. It's funny, the older you get, I guess they fly by just based on you keep having the ruler, halving, Halving, the ruler, and then by comparison, time seems to be faster. And that being said, when you've got a deadline for a record that is as labor intensive as well as they all are with the Power Nerd thing, last time I checked it was last Saturday, and here we are again. So here's my update for this week. As I've been talking about, I have been working on the vocals and the lyrics for this record, and they've been elusive in a sense, like I think I had talked about last week, where I feel that there's some sort of a block there that needed to be pushed through in order to access some of those lyrical themes. So the techniques that I've been employing to facilitate that on a real practical level, and maybe these are things that you could apply to your own work and find similar benefit. So as I've been writing these songs, there's a sort of a preset melody that I heard in the beginning while in a compositional stage. And one of the biggest pitfalls that I think we can run into as writers is that sense that that melody that's stuck in your head is the only one. I heard from a very successful songwriter that I had the fortune of sitting with at one point, that it's the third version of the chorus that is the one you should typically, not should use, but that's the one that they find themselves thinking, okay, well, there's where the gold is, so to speak. But that's a whole new process, because switching gears is really fundamental to allowing that to happen. And I'm not sure about yourselves, but switching gears has always been difficult for me. So I'll have a melody that I think is appropriate for the riff, and then any attempts to modify that or to try a different one typically results in me changing the foundation of the song. And so here's where I'm at with that aspect of it is, for example, last night there's a song, the working title, Self-Love. And the midsection was not landing right for me. And it never had. So I utilized the opportunity to integrate keyboards and bass tracking and things that I had done elsewhere into the session as an opportunity to focus on that structure and get a sense of what it is that wasn't working and maybe try a few different things. But what ends up happening, and this is a risk that I think is important to take and to work through, is by attempting to change the midsection, I came up with a part that was better than the rest of the song, at least at that time, that moment. And then trying to integrate that into it, all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, maybe this new thing is actually the chorus. And so then I rearranged the structure, which up to this point only needed a slight modification to the midsection in order for it to be great. By trying to make that modification, I wrote something new, then I thought that could be the chorus, and then I put that in, and then all of a sudden the existing chorus that I have doesn't fit anymore, and so I think, okay, well, maybe that's the midsection now, or maybe it's a pre-chorus, and then you start shuffling these parts around, and then before you know it, it's a total mess. The entirety of this arrangement, which 30 minutes prior had been 90% done, is now back to maybe 30%. And so I took a break and just went and had some dinner. And while I was eating, I recognized, okay, well, this is another part of this process that is good for you to be cognizant of. In that, in order to pursue making a song the best it can be, it requires sort of trashing things periodically and attempting something that is completely out of the comfort zone for the song, with the awareness that by doing that you may have wasted an entire night. You may have spent the precious little time that you've got remaining to finish this project going down a rabbit hole that yields nothing. And that can be frustrating because you think, okay, well, I don't want to change anything then. That's the end result of that. It's like, okay, well, knowing that the effort could go into wasting time and completely altering this structure that is really close to being right as it is, a lot of times that's a deterrent. You think, oh, I don't want to do that. But here's the end of that story: is then I woke up and I listened to it, and in the cold light of day, the structure that I had been sort of experimenting with is clearly wrong. But the new section, as opposed to thinking of it as a new chorus, or as opposed to thinking of it as a new midsection, all of a sudden I realized, oh, this acts as a bridge and a much stronger pre-chorus. And had I not gone down that avenue of potentially feeling like I had wasted time and experimenting with this thing, then the song wouldn't have ended up as cool as it actually did. So that process of sort of jumping into the unknown and experimenting with something that's almost perfect and then potentially totally trashing that is a really important part of this process. So it's like having to suspend that fear of either wasting time or putting in a bunch of effort that won't yield anything, or that kind of uncomfortable feeling that comes from taking a structure and then reorganizing it right at the 11th hour is something that is essential, I think. And so moving forward, whenever I get this sort of intuitive sense that a part of a song is not working or a part of an arrangement needs work, the tendency to let the fear of that chaos that is a result of throwing something new into the mix, that fear, recognizing that fear is a part of it, and then utilizing your recognition of that fear as an impetus to doing it, is a big part of it. The other things that I've recognized this week that it's fair to explore how I'm feeling about it is the sense that I think you can put all the nuts and bolts into the making of a record. You can put together a team, you can put together a strategy, you can put together the studios, and you can find ways to finance it, and then you can organize your time so that you've got enough time allocated to these certain tasks. All these things on a practical level make perfect sense, but the thing that I had forgotten about, I don't know if I talked about this last week, but it's relevant to talk about again because it just keeps coming up. The thing that I had forgotten about is that making music and making art in general is an emotional workload as well. So you can have all these pieces in place. You can control that in any way that you feel like you're capable of to facilitate the time and the money and the personnel in order to do it. But you can't forget that I can't forget, in order for it to work properly, you have to commit to the emotional components of it. And that's a whole other workload, because my tendency to be distracted by small stimulus is extreme. Like the sound of the sound of people talking, or pets, or the sound of people's footsteps, or all these things which seem insane are really something that I've accepted are a part of my trip. Like, I'm very easily distracted by weather, everything. So all those best laid plans of facilitating the time and the situations that potentially can help facilitate your creative ideas all go by the wayside when you recognize again that it's an emotional workload. It's an emotional package of energy that needs to be allocated, that is ephemeral, in that you can have all these scenarios set up, you can have all this time put aside, you can have the people set up, you can have people come in, but what if you're in the wrong frame of mind? What if you're not feeling it that day? And there's another level of frustration and complexity that comes with making a record on a deadline that you can't summon that. You can't bank on being in the right frame of mind to facilitate creativity. So, how do you deal with that? So here's what I have come up with as a way through this particular part of the process, which obviously has been a part of my last week, but I'm also aware that this is a part of every record, specifically at this particular period, at this particular point of a artistic statement's birthing process. This is just, it's another thing that happens. I've been trying to utilize the Power Nerd record as a way for me to make mental notes of, oh right, this happens every time. Right, you shouldn't be surprised by it. You shouldn't be surprised by, for example, one night thinking, oh, it's not working at all. This is stupid. This is awful. This is the worst thing that I've ever made. You need to be prepared for that, because it's also, in the other hand, moments of, I can't believe how good this is. This is shockingly good. This may be the best thing that I've ever made. Like, that feeling exists hand in hand with the other one. And I think what this particular record, again, is so useful to me for is to make mental notes when those things happen and say, oh, there's that. Yeah. There's that. It's not going to work, going to sleep thinking that you're a failure. And in the other hand, going, this is a world-changing, life-defining, euphoric piece of work that requires nothing but me to listen to it so that I can actualize what its true nature is, which I know is strong and perfect. Both of those things exist, and this record has been a great opportunity to recognize that, because every record, I think back to Terry, I think back to Ocean Machine, I think back to Empath or City or Ziltoid or whatever, and it existed in all of those. So, like the adage, if everything is chaos, then nothing is. If everything is emotionally volatile, then nothing is. It's more a matter at that point of observing it and say, okay, so what are you feeling? You're feeling that euphoria, you're feeling that depression, you're feeling this and that and the other thing. And acknowledging it makes it dissipate in a weird way. And then you can get back to work. So when you're in the frame of mind that isn't creative, or you are feeling psychologically unable to connect with the theme that you've established for any record, your record or any of the past records, What am I learning here? Well, one technique that I'm finding that can really get me through those periods when there's a deadline is when you're singing along to a song you've written. So say you've got a 4-minute song, maybe 3 to 4 specific parts. You've got a bridge, chorus, pre-chorus, verse. You're singing along to it. There's this subconscious cadence to the vocals that up until this week I hadn't recognized I was chasing while trying to sing the vocal lines. If I just do a scratch track into a microphone of the melody that I'm hearing without thinking about the cadences, and I'll explain what I mean by cadence in a moment, the vocals sound very tentative and very weak. And I often had been under the impression, I was like, oh, you're just not in the frame of mind to sing. You're feeling, maybe you're mentally not strong enough or whatever. But the truth of it is actually, you're not paying attention to what you intrinsically know the cadences of that vocal performance are. And the nuance of that is so specific that I realized that the production of a record comes down to identifying what those cadences are. So, a cadence, I don't know the dictionary definition of it, but in my experience with the word and how it relates to my work, the cadence would be, say the words of a chorus are, I went to the store. So for me it's like, okay, so identify what the attack on the letter I is. Is it I? With that sort of a guttural, I went to the store. And where does the T fall on the line, on the musical line with the word store? Like, I went to the store. It's like where that T falls, how you hit that I, how you put the emotional components of the word went into it. It's easy to deconstruct it to the point where it becomes a technical exercise and then there's no emotions in it whatsoever. But if you're able to say, oh, I understand when this was written, how I said that, and then being able to follow that as a guideline for when you're tracking vocals, I went to the store or whatever, all of a sudden you realize that your template for what you need to achieve on an emotional level had been established so early on that when you're not in the frame of mind to be able to achieve that, it's about remembering what those cadences were and then just technically trying to reproduce those. And I would argue that although that often doesn't end up being the final vocal, because if you're emotionally not there, it's lacking something for sure, but to push through those moments of insecurity or self-doubt, remembering the cadences of the vocal or remembering the way that the guitar was being played in the beginning and then being able to break that down to small components allows you to make progress. So last night I was thinking, okay, I've got nothing on the emotional side that needs to really hammer this home. And I thought, okay, well, remember what it was about how you first sang that vocal line. Remember what it was on a technical level and then reproduce that. And so I attempted that, and then I doubled it, and then I tightened it up. And then by listening to it, I was like, that's what it was. Right, I remember. And at that point, you're able to say, it's the nuances of the way that that line was delivered that allows me to reconnect with the emotional parts of what it was that drew it out in the first place. And then it's like a rope tow. It's like a tether that allows me to then say, right, now when I listen to the verse, it doesn't sound like a frightened version of myself trying to remember what the line was. It sounds like me technically breaking down what it originally was into its component parts. And although the emotional part of it is not significantly imbued in that performance yet, I hear the song for what it's meant to be, and then it's like, oh, hallelujah, I can then carry on without being distracted by the tentative sound of the vocals. That makes sense? I mean, arguably no, but it's a hard one to explain, because it's about breaking down the components of a delivery into something that can be replicatable, can be replicated. So that's one thing that I found about the vocals, and as a result, I've managed to make a lot of progress with them, even when my life has been demanding me to be elsewhere. So, like, here's some other things. I write down these notes. I'll write. There's another moment that I was able to identify with the creating of records this week that I have had the experience of for the entirety of my career, but I've never been able to identify as something. It's like it's right in front of you, but you're looking at it, but you're not able to say, oh, this is, yeah, are you guys seeing this? And that is, there's a moment towards the end of each record where the ideas that you've had become songs. What do I mean by that? I've got unlimited ideas. I mean, obviously not unlimited, but I've got more ideas than I've got time for, typically. And I jot them down. I'll make a session, and I'll put maybe a melody on top of a guitar, or maybe something inspired me that day, and it was I put it into a Pro Tools session. Then I've got a folder on my desktop that's called Ideas, and then from that folder I start to mine things that seem like they could fit into a general theme that I'm working towards, and then maybe I'll choose 12, and then those 12 you start to refine, but they're all still ideas. They've all got this kind of loose, disconnected, yet there's an idea within it that might be alluring, that you then start to put together into a record. And then with this process, I took 11 of those ideas, and then I put them into a jagged arrangement that worked on some level, but without any nuance. And then I present it to the drummer, then we track it, and then from there I'm left with drums, bass, and some tentative guitars and vocals that make up this broad stroke of what an album will be. But when does it become a song? I recognize this week that it becomes a song when I sit with those versions of it, with the drums and with a tentative arrangement and a couple of vocal ideas, and then I tune up my guitar. Every tune, by the way, the best. And then I start to learn the song again. By learning the song, things become clear to me. I'm like, oh, why is this not doubled? Or why would you go into a midsection there? That should be a chorus. But it's like I can't connect with that until I learn the song and own it by playing guitar along to that level of completion. And by doing that, I'm like, oh, this needs to change, this needs to change. Oh, why is this like this? Oh, great. And by getting it under my hands, so to speak, all of a sudden the song becomes an actual piece of my musical history, in a way. And in a similar way, it further refines itself into becoming an actual piece of music by, once I've recorded the guitar parts, once I've gone through that process, and then redoing bass parts and restructuring maybe harmonic contents of chords and keyboards. And my sessions are set up, and eventually I'm going to go through my studio process so that you can see how I do it, because my sessions are set up in a way that everything is always malleable. You can always change it. You can always change the tonality. You can always change how the guitars are. You can always change the riffs up to about 2 weeks before I deliver the record. And it's with the same tones and the same volume and the same gain structure, so that it can kind of always morph and always change. And like last night, I can go down avenues with it, but then revert. It's a bit of legwork, and it's a lot of mental preparation to make sure that you're keeping tracks of parts, and if you delete something, putting it at the end of the session, so in the event that that doesn't work, you can bring it back. And so the next step of that, once I've got everything at this sort of it's less loose, but it's still loose, but it's a song now. I then take my acoustic, and I've got an acoustic guitar tuned to standard. And most of my stuff is written in B or C or whatever, but I have an acoustic guitar, this Prestige Empath acoustic, but I've got it with true temperament frets, so in standard it's really solidly in tune. And then I wander around playing to the arrangement in standard as if it's a campfire song, as if it's something that, Kumbaya, my lord, or whatever, And then by playing acoustic guitar to it, standing up, I realize I'm like, oh, that verse doesn't work. Oh, that pre-chorus is too short. Oh, that chorus is wonky. Because I'm so used to these sort of complex voicings that come with my open C tuning that it's easy to forget that it's still a song. So by playing acoustic to it in standard, all of a sudden it congeals it into a song, and at that point I can get a sense of, is this a good song fundamentally? I think what ends up happening a lot of times without that process, and again, not every record involves this, but for this one, by doing that, it's easy to clarify certain passages that I may have gotten lost in the psychological glee of doing. Like maybe it's an interesting thing to play. Maybe there's a tonality to it that's on a technical level, like flattering. But by playing along to it with an acoustic guitar, all of a sudden I'm able to recognize, oh, that's an ego thing. You're just doing that because you want to prove that you can play some complicated lick or what have you. So this is where the definition of this record is important for me to clarify why I would want to make a record such as this. And the clarification is simply, I think there was a lot of fundamental songwriting lessons that I either ignored or never learned. And although throughout my career as a musician, there's been songs that are of a more standard nature, whether or not it's Life from Ocean Machine or Detox or Stagnant or Spiritual Collide or whatever. My reason for writing that is because I think there's a real art to making a good song, that the distinction between it being a good song and just a song with that sort of structure is so subtle. The last thing I'll say about that is there was a moment this week when I was writing the lyrics to a certain song, and the thing I was deliberating about was whether or not the lyrics said, it's just the nature of life, or whatever the line's going to end up being, or because that's the nature of life. So either it's just or because it's. When I was younger, the distinction between those two things would only have been decided based on how it feels to sing it. And that's still the case. How it feels to sing, it's just the, feels different than because that's the, or cause that's the nature. So that's still a component, but the thing I realize now is the subtlety of the intent of those two lines really says something on some level, that when you're aware of it, you have a deeper degree of control over what it is that you're trying to put across. For example, the differences between those two lines, because that's the nature of life, has an implication of trying to teach something, like dispensing benevolence. That's the way things are. Whereas it's just has a sense of resignation to it. It's like, it's just the way things are. Feels different on an emotional level than because that's the way things are. And the subtlety of what it is that you're trying to put across on an emotional level gets affected much more than you would think by the decision to use one of those two things. So as I'm writing, I'll jot down the ideas and then come back and say, oh, that sounds performative. That sounds like you're trying to teach somebody. That sounds like you're trying to say to your audience, oh, I've got this figured out and here's what I've learned, and all this sort of thing. And without awareness of what your intent is, which I've been rattling on about since the beginning of this series, you won't understand how the choice between one of those two options will affect the listener. Not in a direct way, perhaps, but on a real subtle level. There's this sense that, I mean, I know I feel this, and I'm sure you do. It's like, don't tell me what to fucking feel. Don't tell me what to think. You know? So being cautious of what your intent is and how the words that you choose to use carry significant energy allows you to really refine the statement to the point where you're able to put across what it is that you're looking to put across. And that goes hand in hand, again, as I've been saying, of trying to understand yourself during the process. So it's one thing to understand the differences between the subtlety of those two lines, but it's another thing to say, okay, which one do you choose? Are you trying to teach people something? Are you qualified to teach people something? Or is what you're trying to say that you don't fucking know, but it seems like that's what's going on? And that's what I chose. So it can, because there's so many lyrics on a record too, it can get away from you. Now, the other thing I would say is it's easy to go down that path to the point where you're second guessing everything, and you're like, well, what am I saying here? Is this going to imply something that I don't mean? And so this goes also hand in hand with trusting that you know what you're going to say. Trusting that you know that what you're going to say is something that you want to say. And trusting that the words that seem to be at the tip of your tongue are the right ones. And the only way to refine that so that you can actually hear it and say, oh, that is the right one, is to just fucking commit to something. And then by committing to it and listening back to it, as opposed to feeling like a cringe every time you hear yourself say something that's not exactly what you meant to say, more recognizing, oh, there's something about that isn't right. It doesn't sit with me. What is it? Is it that one word? Is it that one phrase? Is it the cadence? Is it all these things? And then trying to refine it based on intuition up to the deadline. And the reason deadlines work for me is I think I'm old enough, long enough in the tooth to recognize perfection and chasing perfection is a fool's game. If I ever made a perfect record, there'd be no reason to make another one. So therefore, accepting the fact that where you're at as a person is only going to be what the record is, and in its own way, the record is perfect as a result of you just being the imperfect version of yourself at that moment. So those deadlines come up and you're just like, yeah, but it's not perfect. It's not 100%. It's like, dude, it's because you're not fucking perfect. So you can try and control the vision up to the point where you're psychologically / spiritually / personally available to be for this chunk of music. But past that point, man, like if you're holding on to this sense that you can't release it until it's perfect, then chances are you're never going to release it because you're not perfect. And now I'm at the stage of the record where I'm changing things, and then I recognize, I'm like, oh, hold on, that's more like what Moth is. Oh, hang on, that's more like what Axolotl is. So staying that course and sticking to the vision requires this combination of diligence on a technical level, like where are the edits, where are these files, how do I do this, what happened there, where's this computer problem located, how am I going to solve that, keeping all that in mind, how do I keep the family okay, how do I keep money coming in, how do I do this, all these things, and at the same time creating space for yourself so that when you do have a couple of hours to really dig into the process and be emotive and do all these things, that you're allowing yourself to be that character, to be awkward, to be cringy, to say things and record things because you don't know what the verse is going to be that you may potentially listen back to and be like, oh, I hate that. Oh, I hate that. I mean, here's the thing, is it's fun. It's art. That's what art is. And my particular process, which is obviously different than yours or others, is that in order for me to make an emotional statement, I need to understand what I'm feeling. That's just me. I'm not saying that that's the technique that everybody should employ to make music, but that's me. And I'm old enough and experienced enough to recognize that that's a part of my process. So as opposed to spending energy feeling embarrassed by that, or it's because it's not like somebody else, then on some level it's without value, or I need to re-evaluate my process. It's not that at all. And if there's anything I'm hoping to impart by the nature of this process being documented for YouTube, is like, it's about finding your process. Whatever it is, that's mine. I'm like a neurotic dude, right? Like that's what I bring to the table. It's and yes, of course, I'm trying to find ways to navigate that, or minimize it, or mitigate it where I'm able to, or be able to recognize when I'm just being over dramatic or absurd about it. I mean, yeah, of course, these are all parts of growing up. But more so than solving it, it's about being aware of it and recognizing it. And then by doing that, then as somebody who produces himself and mixes and engineers and does the instrumentation and does the lyrics and has the emotional parts of it that need to all come together in order for it not to be just to be a technical exercise, I need to understand it. And by doing that, I can create an efficient workflow that facilitates who I am in a way that the end result of it is not to make my life more complicated as this sounds, for sure. It's not necessarily about that. What it's about is being efficient with it and enjoying it, because I love it. There's certain parts of it I love more. I mean, I'm definitely more comfortable in just sort of plucking away at the technical aspects of music because it's not super invasive emotionally. But I recognize that it's not just that. You can't just do that. You have to dig in. You have to get snotty and emotionally exhausted and like, oh, it's never going to work, and oh my God, it's the best thing ever. Like that's a part of it as well. So recognize that. I'm like, okay, so how do we make this work? How do we make this work? And Power Nerd's the next example of how we're learning how to make that work. And I'm almost done. Yeah. So that's where I'm at this week. We're in the trenches now, folks. So if you are as well, I wish you luck. And I don't know, throw in trite sayings here. Don't take wooden nickels. Can't make a sow's ear out of a silk purse, or the opposite, whichever it is. Anyway, see you next week.